Right, I'm going to get us kicked off, chaps.
Let's do it.
I don't know really what to do with this pillow, but if you've not already subscribed, then you need to.
Good plug.
Yeah,
Get it in early.
That's it.
Right, let's do this. Welcome to the first ever episode of the Elliot Reeves Show. I am Elliot Reeves, founder and host of Inspired Edinburgh. If you don't know what it is, then go and check it out. I'm joined today by three of Scotland's most esteemed content creators. To my left is Gavin Bell, founder of Bluecliff Media, a prolific Scottish vlogger, Facebook ads expert. We then have Jason Auld, world record-breaking extreme unicyclist, amongst other things, modafinil spokesperson.
Really clutching at straws for my intro here.
And general all-round good guy.
Yeah,
and finally, Shaun Vlog, Scottish vlogger extraordinaire, Visit Scotland ambassador, and or thereabouts. Maybe not.
No.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. We'll get into that.
Never heard of them. Never heard of them.
So the idea with this morning's show was just to kind of get some interesting people together for an interesting chat, as we like to do. I thought that an interesting topic might be Scotland. We're all from Scotland. Some of us more northern than others. And yeah, it's just a chance to talk about Scotland's culture, things that we do well, things that we could do better, Scotland's social media, and so forth. So guys, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. I think we should just all think. I think Shaun needs to change his name to Shaun Vlog by
Officially,
default.
by default.
I mean, Shaun Vlog is just one of my various different online personas.
He's got all these passports.
But yeah, I don't know. That's just one of my brands. I've had it for a while. It's kind of weird. People go, "Are you Shaun Vlog?" And I'm like, I think I am. I'm Shaun.
So, Shaun, we'll start with yourself. I mean, when did you first start creating content, and what was kind of the motive behind it?
To be honest, I've been creating content for about 15 years because I was a journalist before I started like doing YouTube or social media and stuff. I worked for various newspapers in Scotland and then ended up moving down south and worked for a magazine group, doing all the photography and writing as well. I was a writer. And I think that was just the early... it's just the early stage of what we are kind of doing now. It's storytelling. It's just an evolved format.
Yeah.
A lot of people are still kind of stuck with that old ways, and there's still a lot of there's still a place for good journalism and writing and stuff. But I just saw myself better suited to this type of communication.
Yeah.
So I have been doing it for a long time. I guess if we're talking specifically about YouTube, I started playing around in 2014.
Okay.
And started doing it a little bit more serious in 2015. So
Yeah.
3 or 4 years, I guess.
What I think's really interesting is that you and Gav specifically have really used Scotland in many ways, or leveraged Scotland to build your own personal brands. And when did you realise that that was a thing that you could actually do, that might be successful?
Well, I've always been really proud of the fact that I'm from Scotland and Edinburgh, and I've always loved Scotland. We've got so many stories to tell. And if we look back through history, we've got so many big, important characters that I think nowadays we kind of forget, who've done amazing things for Scotland. And I think until very recently, I was probably ashamed to talk about Scotland.
Why so?
I don't even know. And I think probably a lot of youngsters would say the same to you now if you ask them.
You think so?
Because we're rubbish at football.
We're rubbish at
Do
football.
you think that's a part of it?
I reckon so. Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was probably around about the referendum debates that we all got into in 2014. I started to think more about my background, because I've been in London for 4 years at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I didn't really talk about Scotland much when I was down there. But on coming back, I was like, you know what? We've got a lot of good things going for us that we should be talking about. And the more I started talking about my Scottish background and then Scottish stories around us, Scottish places, the more I started building a connection with people who felt a real deep connection with Scotland, generally through their ancestry.
Okay.
I would say. Certainly in the States, in Canada, in Australia, there's a lot of people who are very, very passionate about Scotland. Even if sometimes we are not.
Yeah. Gav?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I feel like for me, so I started my video journey creating videos around entrepreneurship and running my own business, and kind of quickly found out that people really weren't interested in me. In terms of like,
That's a shame.
well, it's just like your friends and your family are interested and they'll watch, but the stranger on the street won't watch what you're doing and like what you're having for breakfast and stuff. So I then quickly tried to figure out, well, how do I get people to watch? And leveraging something else, in this case for me it was the Scottish thing, to bring people's attention to me worked. So going out in Scotland and hiking and things, I found people that were interested in Scotland and they watched the video because they're interested in that, and then they came and watched my stuff because I'd leveraged their attention with Scotland.
So did you think to start broadcasting content about Scotland before you realised that it was popular, or was it the other way around?
I think the first Scottish video I did was when me and Shaun went for a walk up Arthur's Seat,
Yeah, I
and we put
remember
the
that
drone
one.
up, and that video got picked up by like the Edinburgh Evening News, and I can't remember, I just remember that.
Slow news day.
Yeah. I remember it getting picked up more than any video I ever had, and that kind of, for me, was like, oh, maybe there's something in this Scotland thing.
I do think, sorry to interject.
No, not at all.
I think what Shaun has highlighted in terms of, and I have to be very careful with the vocabulary I use here in terms of, I don't want to say that Scottish people are ashamed or that they think that Scottishness is a negative thing. I think the word nationalism in general is quite a negative term and is very loaded, so people don't like to talk about it. I think generally in Scotland, nationalism has a little bit more positive connotations. But to what Shaun said in terms of other people appreciating Scottishness more than Scottish people, I think, I mean, it's a well-known fact. I don't want to make up any statistics, but there's more people that celebrate like Burns Night and St Andrew's Day outside of Scotland than in Scotland, you know.
Yeah,
and you only have
totally.
to look at kind of St Patrick's Day and see how it's a universal celebration, and then you look at St Andrew's Day and it's like, you know, people are talking about, should we get a day off on St Andrew's Day? Like, no, because then I won't get a day off somewhere else, you know. Like, so no, forget about it. So I think like Shaun, like I spent a lot of time in London. My fiance's from London, and I think when I lived in London, I don't know if you felt this, you tend to feel a little bit more of a kind of bleeding heart patriot, just because you're not there anymore. And I think maybe the kind of shall we say, like, I don't want to say shame, but like maybe not appreciating Scotland is because it's right in front of your face.
Yeah, definitely.
So and maybe the negatives are far more prominent when you're there than say the positives are.
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I went to school in the 90s. I came from a working class background in quite a poor neighbourhood here in Edinburgh, and in those days, like, I didn't feel like we had anything to be particularly proud of. We never had any idols to look up to really who were Scottish. So I guess all the way up through my teenage years until I decided to kind of think about making a move. Like, I knew I was from Scotland and I love Scotland and everything, but I didn't really have anything to shout about. So it's only once you take a step back, I think, and like you said, once you travel, once you leave Scotland, and you can take a look at it from the outside and think, actually, we're pretty all right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've got a good story to tell.
It's quite interesting what you say there as well in terms of like being a contemporary Scottish person. Like, you know yourself, like a lot of your content is centered around the romanticism of Scottish culture and like classically what it was, which kind of started with Walter Scott and all the novels that he wrote, and he created this almost narrative of what it was to be Scottish, which was at the time kind of done as a marketing ploy to appeal to Victorian England, and a lot of kind of upper class English people. That's why you started having things where, you know, it turns out all the lords and ladies in Scotland are English, you know. And it's interesting, like the idea of what it is to be a contemporary Scottish person, like what it is, you, in a way, to have an attachment to something that feels Scottish is almost to go back in time and to, you know, everyone always talks about, shut up about William Wallace, it was like 1,000 years ago, and yet this guy is this like tentpole of Scottishness. It's like there's no one now that you would say is kind of, you can hang your hat on. I think a lot of that is to do with the politics of if you're British and you come out and say that you're Scottish, all of a sudden it's an anti-English sentiment. You know, the one that comes to mind is Andy Murray. You know, it's that classic, he's Scottish when he loses and British when he wins. So I think that also plays into how Scottish people view themselves. It's almost this kind of like, yeah, I am Scottish when I lose. You know, that's the Scottish part of me. Thank God I'm British, bringing me up. You know. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of it.
And I think like the majority of Scottish people live in the Central Belt as well. And I think if I'm being honest, like I didn't spend any proper time away from that until I was quite old.
Well, that's a good point for you to raise, actually, because you're not from the Central Belt.
Yeah, so coming up from the Shetland Islands, it's Shetland's a kind of anomaly in itself, where they're not British, they're not Scottish, they're Shetlanders.
Yeah.
They're Shetlanders. I don't really follow that. I would say I'm Scottish first. I'm not British at all. But yeah, Shetlanders think they're Shetlanders, so it's completely different up there. But going what you said about going down to London, I actually lived in Manchester for 2 years, and 100% like the patriotism or the love for my country when I was down in England in Manchester was so much bigger than like when I lived in Shetland growing up. Like you go down and all of a sudden watching Braveheart is like the highlight of your year, and
standing up when the anthem comes on in the rugby games. Yeah,
exactly. and it's like. You just long. Like for me, I just long to get back to Scotland, even though I never had that attachment to the country before.
Yeah.
And this was just pre-referendum, so I was getting fired up with the referendum and blah blah blah. So I don't know why this kind of cynicism towards a country comes for people that live here, because you look at other countries like America and they don't have that. They're all very patriotic. So I don't know why we have this in Scotland.
I think there's been a definite vacuum in terms of education, and not everybody has had the same experience that I described, but I've talked about this a lot recently. I think a lot of Scottish people of a certain generation were very much forgotten about in terms of Scottish history and what happened in our past, and it was only me looking up my own on my own that I found out more about Scotland, because it was just totally lacking at school in the 90s and in 2000s, early 2000s. I just don't think that generation, certainly in Edinburgh, we didn't get taught Scottish history. And everybody I speak to of the same kind of age group all agree with me. And I think that lack of education, it means that you don't really know about where you've come from. It doesn't give you don't know your identity really.
Yeah, I'd add to that. I don't think I learned anything about Scottish history in school, to the point that I bought a Scottish history for children's book at the age of 18 to learn Scottish history. It was amazing. Pictures, like, walked you through Scottish history in like cartoon children form. And I learned the most I've ever learned in my life.
Well, shout out to Neil Oliver, the people's historian. He's got a fantastic series called The History of Scotland, and it very much veers away from the kind of stereotypes and cliches, to the point where, I mean, obviously everyone romanticizes their own history. You know, it's not unique to Scotland, but he makes a point of saying, you know, this is the character in history and this is the reality, and actually brings up really strong points about things that, you know, I think if you're searching for pride in our history, it's very easy to go for things like, oh yeah, the uprising against the English, and then it stops there, kind of. And then maybe you can talk about the Enlightenment, but who knows about the Enlightenment? Very few people understand that. People think that David Hume is just the statue that you rub for good luck. You know,
it's such an important period that shaped the world.
Absolutely, yeah. And you could almost say that we were at the forefront. Like there's a great story in that series where they talk about how Benjamin Franklin came to Scotland when America were going through the Revolution, and it was kind of, they wanted to model their system on Scotland. And actually, if you look it up, there's a huge number of prominent Scottish figures who've actually signed the Declaration of Independence. So when you look at that, you know, and there's other things like, I might be speaking out of turn here, but one of the big universities was in part founded by a Scottish guy. It's quite that I mean, that gets you proud that you don't have to stick to this. And don't get me wrong, I'm very proud to be in working class too. But you have there is a strong history of academics. There is a strong history of, you know, philosophy, and Adam Smith basically created economics. You know, so. But it isn't taught. You know, that I can say from my personal experience. I think we're about the same age. I was taught about, when Alexander fell off the horse, died, created this power vacuum. Edward I came in, you know, made us feel bad about ourselves, and then Wallace kind of fell on his sword, literally, and then Robert Bruce came, and there was the spider story, and then that's about it, really.
You've really done your homework for this.
I have. I've forgotten all the statistics, so I didn't want to see it. It's too learned. But
I'm learning a lot.
Yeah, this is great.
But yeah, no, you're right. Like, and I remember at primary school we read a book. I think it was called The Desperate Journey, and it's about the Highland clearances. But even that was fictitious, and And even that, again, like when you're thinking about Scottishness as an overall theme, it's very much us being the victims again. You know, it's very much us being shafted by a bigger power. And I don't think that, I think maybe that leads to our kind of underdog status, because the narrative of Scottish history is that if we've ever achieved anything, it's been that we've stopped someone from, can I swear, or is it?
Yeah, man.
Fucking us. So, yeah, I mean, but yeah, so...
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's, yeah, maybe.
And football is a huge thing.
Yeah,
you have to say, because like, you go down south, right? I think most Scottish people who are fans of football have an English team as well. And the reason you have an English team is because there's nothing to talk about with other people if you've just got a Scottish team.
Don't get me started on that.
Oh yeah, like so. Even things like, it's just quite like, I turned to telly and my girlfriend's an Arsenal fan, and it was Celtic versus Partick Thistle, and the pitch looked worse than the meadows. and she was like, "Is this Scottish football?" I was like, "Don't look at it, don't look at it." Like, you know, I was just like, this is not an accurate representation, you know. Or you're watching Champions League football and okay, PSG are juggernauts, but they absolutely bum Celtic, and you're like, that's your best team, the team that have won 10 in a row. Like, that's your best team. They got bummed by PSG. So
I'm going to defend Scottish football here though.
Oh, interesting.
Aberdeen versus Burnley, Europa League.
Yeah.
Aberdeen drew with them, and to be fair, we're probably the better team in Aberdeen, and we gave them a good fight down in England.
Yeah.
You compare the squads, and it's like Aberdeen squad value something like 5 million. Burnley's like 120 million.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Aberdeen made like 2 million last year. Burnley made like, I don't know, 100 million or something. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So like the money, the difference is insane.
Well, even when you look at the Hearts team, I don't want to make this all about football. Even when you look at the Hearts team that ended Celtic's unbeaten run, you know, there was like 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds in the squad that were beating players that, you know, comparatively speaking, were worth millions. And I mean, I don't know the argument I'm trying to make here, but yeah, I mean, obviously there's much less money in Scottish football, so that's a big thing. But it's just the fact that, like, I remember speaking to someone the other day, and I was like, there's 20-year-olds that are alive that have never seen Scotland at a World Cup. And I haven't. John Collins getting skinned by Ronaldo, original Ronaldo, Brazilian Ronaldo, at France '98, seared into my mind. But I'd rather see that. I'd rather see us get knocked out of the group stages every year than, you know, just awful qualifying campaigns.
But I think, you know what, if we're going to talk football, I think it's part of our national identity, really. We talk about money, and there's not been money in Scottish football, but I don't think that's a good excuse, because if you look at what Iceland have done over the last 10 years, they started at the grassroots. If you go over there, they've got football pitches on every single street corner. Everybody plays football, and they get taught well. They've got such a good coaching setup. Okay, they had probably a decent budget to do that with, but they've got a tiny population, smaller than Edinburgh. And look what they achieved over the last two big, obviously the European Cup and the World Cup as well.
I think ironically as well, like when you speak to old, like great players, and as a Liverpool fan, shout out Liverpool fans, the great player that comes to mind is Kenny Dalglish. They talk about the fact, not necessarily that there's not these, like, you know, government funded systems to get part of it, it's that kids aren't in the street kicking a ball anymore. Like they talk about, it's a classic one of like having a tennis ball or like having a rolled up bit of paper and just like kicking it. And it's akin to, and I guess this is relevant to you, the Brazilians kicking the futsal about on the beach. It's that you train as a kid, one, to have fun, which is the major thing. It's not like this rigorous athletic elite training system. It's that you're having a kickback with your mates, and that's generally you learn through play. But it's also the circumstances in which you're playing the game are so kind of disjointed and uprooted that when you get on this lovely pitch with this beautiful ball, it's 100 times easier. So maybe you're right. Maybe money isn't enough. I
think you're right on that. I think money comes as a result of the market. Like the market's the market, and Scottish football's not good enough to attract the money that English football has attracted. So the problem isn't the money. I guess the problem is why is there not enough? Why is the product not good enough? Is it the leadership? I'd probably argue it's from the grassroots level that the system that we have there is just not good enough. Simple as that.
I can see you falling asleep over there.
No, not at all, man. Just to bring this back to a more Scottish perspective, though. I mean, you know, like to what extent is a country's confidence and success pegged on a sport? You know, ultimately, we play other sports as well to a pretty high degree. You know, we're world class in a number of sports. We've got Olympic medals, and you know, we've done a lot of good things. Why is football deemed as being so important, and why should it be that, as I say, Scotland's confidence be linked to
I don't
it?
necessarily think it is entirely, because another one, like I played rugby at school and I have a keep abreast with like the national team. Another thing that's seared into my memory is the recent World Cup loss against Australia. I don't know if you guys watched rugby.
Yeah.
And it was just, again, I was in England at the time, so it's just like, you know, yearning for Caledonia. And it was the way we lost as well. I don't know, there's just a little bit of a like better luck next time, guys, rather than a kind of, we could have beaten Australia, one of the greatest teams in the world, you know. And I felt there was just an acceptance of course we're not going to win. Why would we have won, you know?
So what makes you think that that's the case? Is that in your head, or is that reality?
Well, perception is reality, isn't it, Elliot? So like, I think a lot of it is shaped by that perception. But I don't know, man. I guess that's the question.
It was very much classic Scotland.
Yeah,
which is what we get when we don't qualify for World Cups and everything. And I think things like football actually do play quite a big part, because for me as a young guy growing up, football was everything. So all I cared about was football, speaking to friends, playing football every single day. And so when football is like your life growing up, and all you know of your national team is failure at the end of the day, that plays quite a big part. And whether that's right or wrong, that's not for me to say, but that, like Jason says, that was reality for me during those years growing up.
That's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, you can only imagine, like, if you're an aspiring footballer now, like a young kid in Scotland, and you go, I want to win the World Cup, you'd get laughed out of training. Go home, mate. You're not even going to win the Scottish Cup. Like, you could probably take that home, put it on your mantelpiece. Your mum wouldn't know what it was, you know. And yes, I don't know.
Okay, so let's look out with Scotland then. I mean, you two guys, Gavin and Shaun specifically, engage a lot with a very global audience. I mean, other than the stereotypical, like whiskey, haggis, kilts, and so forth, what do you think is the global perception of Scotland?
I think we're perceived very, very well.
Yeah, really.
I think having a Scottish accent travels really well as well. Wherever you go in the world, people recognise the accent, and as soon as you start speaking, they want to know more about you and where you came from in Scotland. And I think especially in the last 2 or 3 years, Scotland has become a very on-trend place to come to. And everybody, wherever you go in the world, you always find someone who's either planning a trip to Scotland or who has a friend who is.
So true. So true. Like I just come back from a couple of weeks in the States on an embassy trip. Scotland. Shaun did that a couple of years ago, and
good recovery there.
Yeah, that was great. So I just came back from the trip, and basically that trip involved for 2 weeks solid meeting people all day every day. So we must have been in like 50 meetings throughout the whole trip, and in every single meeting we went around the room, and it was everyone was from London, one Irish guy and me from Scotland. And every time we got to me and I went, I'm Gavin, I'm from Scotland, they were always like, Scotland, I love Scotland. I've just been watching Outlander on Netflix. It's amazing. Like, they didn't care about the London people. They only cared about the Scottish person, because for some reason they've just got this obsession with Scotland. And for Americans, I think that is mostly because they all have ancestry from Scotland. They all think that they're from Scotland.
I think to add to that as well, one of the things that's kind of been a motivator for me to keep doing that type of content is the fact that when you go to these places and people are like asking you questions and you don't know how to answer, you kind of feel ashamed. It's like, well, I should know this. So that's definitely been a motivator for me. I mean, doing the content has led to me learning a lot as well. So there's so many people who are interested in Scotland and know a lot about Scotland, a lot more than we do sometimes. So it's definitely this connection that we've got with people from around the world. I mean, we say the States, but actually there's a far bigger reach of Scottish ancestry around the world and people who are interested in Scotland. So yeah, it's something that's really, really cool, and more people here should be aware of how well we are perceived around the world.
It's really encouraging and quite fascinating to hear that. Yeah. I mean, I don't really wish to politicise the conversation. It's perhaps inevitable. I mean, what do you think pre and post DRF Scotland is like? What do you think it was prior to that and in the lead up, and what do you think it's like now? In what way do you think it's changed?
I think, sorry to interrupt you, I think going back to what you said about being ashamed of saying you're Scottish, regardless of your political leanings, there's something very dare I say, shameful about having to admit that Scotland are the only country in history to have voted against their own independence. And regardless of, you know, you take into the political accounts, would it economically be a good idea or what have you, just that statistic on its own. You know, I remember saying that to an American, and obviously Americans, you know, you voted against your own independence. Well, we had to kill thousands of Englishmen to get ours, you know, or even the Irish. You know, you look at the horrible troubles that they've had, and their sentiments towards the English in terms of their independence, and then you look at us, who were handed a referendum completely free of blood, and we decided we didn't want to be independent. And I think that, again, regardless of whether you support yes or no, that in itself creates this narrative of we're kind of almost like a battered wife narrative.
Yeah.
This idea of, you know, we're never going to make it on our own, so we'll just stay with you. Sorry, we asked for more, you know. So, sorry to interrupt you guys.
I think you're totally right, though, and that falls back into the whole conversation of us not being educated properly when we were younger. Because I think a lot of Scottish people, they don't really know what they are. Are they Scottish? Are they British? What are we? I think a lot of people struggle with that question all the time. And I think education is a big part to play in that.
Yeah, 100%. Which that also raises an interesting point, which I could be wrong. So if you know the actual stats, but if we were to remove the 65 plus category from the independence referendum, would we have become independent?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure
that's a large segment of voters.
But what I'm saying is younger. Now, there's another interesting point that can raise that people tend to get more conservative as they get older. But if we were focusing on the younger demographics, like 16, 17-year-olds, I think we would be an independent country right now.
Why do you think it would appeal to younger people to vote for independence?
Right, for me, I'm going to put out there, I support independence, and for me, kind of like Jason said, and maybe naively, I don't really look at the economic, what currency we're going to use, blah, 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 blah. For me, it's just a case of, can a country make all its decisions and do its own thing?
Yeah,
and for
self-determination, isn't it?
Yeah, and for me, when it was the independence referendum at 18, I was 18 years old, I think, or 20, whatever it was. For me, it was like, this is a chance to inspire a nation. To inspire a nation to go, you know what, you can be whatever you want, you can do whatever you want. This country's just decided to go, screw the system, we're going to do our own thing. And that was hugely inspiring for me as a young person, and kind of appealed to my persona of enjoying a bit of risk and not really caring about the kind of complex, stupid issues and the politics. Yeah, exactly. But you kind of have to take those risks sometimes. And like, I got so bored with the politicians arguing and fighting where they could have just gone, you know what, you actually do have a good point on this, and maybe we should take into consideration the fact that the oil industry might bomb or whatever. But for me, it was just a case of, I don't know where I'm leading with this, but it was such an opportunity to inspire so many people in Scotland, and that could have changed the narrative that we spoke about earlier in terms of we're no longer this underdog or this little bitch of Britain. We're actually this country on our own that can go and do what they want.
Yeah, I think it was truly invigorating that time period. I was in London. I had been in London for 2 or 3 years at the time when the referendum went on, and I probably started when that debate started. I was definitely on the no side, but through being in London and spending time with people who were getting involved in the debate in London, I changed. I became a yes voter, and it was the arrogance of some people that I was speaking to in the financial circles. I used to work in investment banking in London, and the arrogance of some of the people that used to talk to me about Scotland as if we were just the wee guys.
Yeah.
And I was just like, hold on a minute, this is really what people think of us.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the time for us to show we are better than that.
Well, you always have to ask yourself the question. I definitely don't like to create an us versus them narrative, and it never is about that. And a lot of English people think that Scottish independence is an anti-English sentiment, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Of course, there's arseholes everywhere. But like for me, as we're pinning our colours to the mast, I voted yes as well. And actually, I was a member of the SNP before I was actually able to vote. I'm no longer a member of the SNP, and I don't support the SNP because I'm a big believer in kind of anti-party politics, more representational politics for the normal people, and less kind of, hey, I support this team, so therefore I've made my decisions before you've even asked me the question. So I don't support the SNP, but I do quite firmly support independence, and it for almost exactly the same reason that Gavin said. It's got absolutely nothing to do with, again, naively, the numbers, but I think because I always compare it to if you live at home with your parents and you go, you know what, going to leave. Well, okay, your mum's not going to do your washing anymore. They're not paying the bills for you anymore. You've got to do everything around the house. The quality of life's probably going to diminish somewhat at first. But it's this idea of self-determination. You take the risk and you gamble because there's something better to be had from it. Now, it's easy for me to say maybe I'm in a position that a lot of people aren't in, but I always thought that maybe there would be a difficult period and maybe, you know, employment would drop and maybe life would get a little bit harder. But I felt like that's a period of struggle that creates and forges a stronger nation and a stronger community. And I think, I was really sad. I was in London as well, actually, and almost everybody I know, I mean, maybe I was living in an echo chamber. Everybody kind of supported my views. A very similar situation when the Brexit vote happened. But everybody was pretty upset and pretty, regardless of whether you thought the oil money was going to come through, regardless of the renewable energy stuff and all this, that, and the other. It's just this idea of like, there's a lot of hope, like you guys just say, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of like, you know, oh my God, where could we be, you know? And then it was like the next day you wake up and you go, we'll just be exactly where we were before.
Is that a bad thing? Like I had a conversation with our mutual friend Greg Zed, I'll call him. I still can't pronounce his surname.
Yeah,
Man Greg,
Polish guy.
Oh yeah, good guy.
And I think a lot of people think that no voters voted no because it was a defensive thing and they were somehow trying to like ruin the lives of the other people. A lot of people probably voted no based on the fact that the numbers didn't stack up. I think that was
Is that why you voted no,
a
Elliot?
significant
Go
part.
on, tell us.
Man, I have no qualms about, you know, sort of trying to explain the rationale behind why someone would vote a certain way in anything. I think that,
good political
like,
answer.
you know, no, I'll come to what I'm happy to say what I voted. I think that
we came in as friends.
No, we tend to look at things based on how we see the world, right? So I think the Scottish Independence Referendum, whilst it probably had to happen, I think it's probably been cataclysmically one of the worst things that's ever happened to this country, because it has actually divided the nation. It really has, like dangerously so. I think that there's so much animosity that exists still, and I see it vitriolic stuff on Twitter all the time. It's virtually, if you follow people from Scotland, I think it's a really toxic environment where it's just, there's a lot of hate. So Scottish independence, do you know what? I think there was either Scottish independence or Brexit that I didn't vote for because I was away. I think it was Brexit. If I voted for Scottish independence, which I think I did, I voted no. Yeah, I voted no.
I think,
but
like,
that wasn't based on the fact that I didn't think, you know, I didn't want Scotland to be an independent country. It was based on the fact that I wasn't satisfied that the people leading the country at the time could sustain what they were talking about.
I think that's totally sensible, and I would never throw anybody under the bus that voted no, not at all. But I would say, in regard to what you said there about it kind of creating a division, that very well may be true, and I think I could see evidence for that. I would say I think we should still be proud of the fact, and talking about throwing people under the bus, we should still be happy that we've not ended up like the Irish. There's not been any bloodshed. There's not paramilitary groups created to fight for an independent Scotland. Now, don't get me wrong, the situation was different over there. It was a different time. But I think the hatred that you see over there, which is obviously fueled by sectarianism, but it's also about, you know, being part of the union and being an independent nation. I think the fact that it's still a conversation and it's not a war in the streets, I think we should be very proud of that.
Yeah. Right, well, let's say hypothetically then, if they are to rerun the independence referendum and go ahead with Indy Ref 2, what do you think that's likely to do for Scotland?
So I'm gonna jump in and say that will happen at some point, and I think Scotland will become an independent country at some point. Don't know when, but I think it will. I think it's just a natural course that it'll take. But I think your point on the lot of hate online, I think there definitely is a lot of hate online, but I don't think I think it's kind of like the loud minority. I think the majority of voters, yes or no, are just kind of average people that just went to the ballot and voted yes or no. They're not shouting or swearing or sending hate on Twitter. I think that's the loud minority, and I think just because we've got these things called social media now, that kind of message is much more apparent and much easier to find, whereas people would have just said it to their wives back in the day. So if we get independence referendum number 2, I think it's going to be much the same. I think you're going to hear a small minority that are very, very loud, and a larger majority that just go and vote for what they think's best.
I totally agree, and I think this is actually plays to one of the dangers of social media, because you do get trapped in a bubble that you want to see. So during the referendum debate, I was very much caught up in the debate on Twitter, and there became a time that's all I saw. All I saw was the fighting on both sides. Since then, I've totally taken a step back from that, and it's basically been removed from my life, that debate. Among my friends, actual friends and family, like, there's not that much division anymore. Even though we all knew what we voted for, we might have had some really heated discussions at the time. There isn't that divide anymore. I think what people are seeing online is, like Gavin said, it's a small minority who are very vocal.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they get the headlines.
Yeah, it's true, man. It's absolutely true. But, like, you know, I feel as though even the very fact that I've said I voted no to Scottish independence somehow makes me feel as though I'll be, like, vilified for saying that. And that shouldn't be the case whatsoever. You know, regardless, irrespective of who you vote for, what your beliefs are, you know, what you value in life. There should never be a situation whereby people are judging you or condemning you for that. And that's very much how it's really become.
I mean, I can't speak for your experience, Elliot, but I don't think, for example, like, there's a lot of like, well, why did we vote for Brexit? And you can plan out, like, what were you thinking? And you like to think that a lot of those people would walk back their decision now. I think with the no thing, I think it was so split down the middle that you can go, you know, I can totally understand why you voted no. And I don't think you're an idiot. I don't think you're any less Scottish. You know, I don't think that. And I think most sensible, well-rounded people who don't spout their toxic opinions on Twitter would be exactly the same as you. So, you know, I can't say that you've not experienced negativity for that, but I can say that I don't think of you as less Scottish, or I don't think of you as, you know, anything else.
But again, the vote for myself wasn't intended purely as a defensive stance. It was actually, I quite like being British. I identify as British. Maybe it's because of, like, my background and my education. I went to a private school. It was primarily a boarding school whilst I was a day pupil with only 500 people. And it was from people all across the world. So I probably struggle more than other people to identify as absolute Scottish, because I've been in an environment with so many different cultures.
Quite possibly, but
I mean, like, if you, I don't want to make this contentious, but had we voted for yes, I mean, if we were basing our financial security on the oil reserves, I mean, they plummeted long after. We'd have potentially been a bankrupt nation. Like, what would we have done?
Yeah,
no one really has any answers for that.
Really,
and
go down
very
the rabbit
quickly,
hole with that,
but it's very quickly kind of swept under the rug. It's easily forgotten about.
But lots of countries, I mean, that's a natural cycle of economics. Countries go through really bad periods and they come back again. Ireland is a prime example. We've talked about Ireland before, but their economy was doing really badly after the financial crisis in 2008. Really, really bad. They had a couple of horrific years. But through companies making big investments, especially in the technology sector, they're doing really, really well again. And there's a lot of jobs. And, you know, there's no saying that Scotland's economy wouldn't have crashed, because it could well have done, and probably would have done. But that's not to say that would be long term.
No, it's true. And what I would also say is, look, if someone presented a cogent argument as to why Scotland should be independent and actually backed it up, and actually it was like a solid case, then I would absolutely consider it. But at that time in that place, I wasn't sufficiently satisfied that it was the right thing to do for me and for the country. That's the view that I took.
I think most people respect that. But I guess the thing is, nobody could ever give you that definitive answer. Even now, in the future, that'll never happen.
There's so much speculation about what could have happened, and I don't think, you know, I feel like maybe you're feeling like you have to get on the defensive because we were all saying that we voted for independence.
Not really. That's not you know, a condition of being in this room.
Well,
this is a thing that you basically are made to feel ashamed if you voted no.
Well, I would say that, like, I think all of us can sit here and quite happily say that, like, we wouldn't want to treat no voters as any less Scottish or look down on them or anything like that in any any kind of suggestion that independence is the only way to be pro-Scottish, I mean, is nonsense, obviously. And I respect your opinion. I respect everything that you said there. And I wouldn't even say that you're wrong. Hey, look at the numbers. Hey, you're wrong. I respect your opinion. I would say, yeah, absolutely. I totally understand why you would vote that. And I think the fact that me and Gavin said that we acknowledge the fact, and you've also said acknowledge the fact that economically, yeah, okay, the oil's going to run out eventually. Always thought that was silly to hang your hat on something that was going to be, transient and impermanent, and especially in a world where we're trying to move away from fossil fuels. So I always thought that was silly. But yeah, I mean, honestly, in all honesty, I think we could be here all day talking about this and we could get absolutely nowhere.
Yeah. I still think it's good that we're actually discussing it in a kind of open forum, like sensible adults,
Totally.
and not throwing our toys out the pram.
Totally.
And, like,
if anything,
I would encourage people to have more open adult conversation around this topic.
I think just because someone disagrees with you doesn't mean that you can't find some common ground. And I think just because I think a lot of people have discussions or arguments because they're trying to convince someone that their side of the argument is correct. And I think when you come at an argument like that, it's totally pointless. I've sat there with people and I've gone, what am I doing? They're never going to agree with me. I'm never going to agree with them. Why are we doing this? It's not a discussion. It's just me telling them what I think and them telling me what they think. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we should encourage that kind of dialogue for sure. So.
I think one of the things that's quite interesting about this topic is the fact that we talked earlier about me saying that I was, up until teenage years, probably not that massively proud of being Scottish. But my feeling is the Independence Referendum totally changed my perception of Scotland. It was one of the only movements I thought politically in the world of independence where I felt really, really proud to kind of become a part of it, because I felt it was pretty inclusive. I felt Scotland was showing its good side. We had some really strong, heated debates.
Bring the mic up to your...
we had some really, really strong, heated debates, but I think at the end of the day, we did show ourselves as an inclusive country.
Totally. I think I would add to what Elliot said in terms of you feeling that you have to go on the defensive sometimes as a no voter. I've definitely felt like that on my side of the fence in terms of a yes voter and going out, and I've been very I've been very hesitant to, if I'm going out into meetings and meeting business owners and things, been very hesitant to tell them what I would have voted or what I support, because I know that a lot of the kind of older business type people are no voters, and I've never wanted to put that in the way of potentially getting along with that person. So I have purposely kept my who I voted for quite secret. But going back to what Jason said a while ago, I think the most important thing in politics that we don't get, and don't know if we ever will get, is this idea of not having parties. Yeah. So I think I was like you. I've been a member of the SNP. I'm no longer a member of the SNP. I don't have a party that I support. But
you've got yellow all over you, though.
Yeah, no, yeah. What's that say about you and you?
Oh, jeez. Now I know why I got the blue one, eh? That fascist guy over there. Shout out to all the Tories there.
Coming from inspired Edinburgh.
Yeah.
But I think we live in a world where you grow up and you're told, right, you're a Tory or you're a Labour, and you're going to tell the other person that they're wrong regardless of what they think. And I think the independence referendum and every political decision, every flipping argument that's in the world is like, you cannot tell me as a person, so me and you, Elliot, let's say we're having a debate on yes or no independence. You can't tell me that you don't agree with anything that I say about independence being a good idea because of your party, for example. And I can't sit here and go, you've got no leg to stand on with your argument because Scotland should be independent and that's just the way it is. Like, you've got good points, I've got good points, and we have to use those good points to make the decision. Mm-hmm. So this politics crap that we all play because we support specific parties is... like, it really angers me because you never move forward with that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's totally toxic, and I'm someone who, at some point in my life, I considered about getting into politics. You're welcome. But I always thought to myself, like, why would I join a group of people who, as I say, I use the expression, like, they've already got the answer to the question before it's ever been asked, Mm-hmm. You don't have to think about it. It's like, I'm a member of the SNP, so therefore I've got to reply to this question this way. And I've always been a huge fan of the way that representational politics was supposed to play out. And like the founding fathers of America, believe it or not, which is ironic because America's become the biggest two-party system in the world, they were 100% against against the idea of party politics, and it was much more representational. And I'm a huge fan of decentralized government. I'm a huge fan of, you know, local communities coming together. I always thought that if I was a politician of any description, and I appreciate it's hard to do this, but I would represent the views of the people that lived in my community. So if the people in my community were conservative, then I would take that voice to the parliament and I would express it. If they were liberal, I would do the same. And you obviously go back and forth from subject to subject. But for me, that's the true definition of a civil servant, is that you represent the people. And that was surely, you know, obviously you talk about what democracy was when it was created, was a world where we had slaves and only men could vote. So totally different. But the idea of the kind of voice for the people, the idea of that as an MP, rather than, and you see them, and it makes me sick, they think that somehow they're like God's anointed chosen one, and that you should bow down to them and go, please sir, what should I say on this? No, it should be, they should come to you.
Absolutely.
They should stand on their soapbox and go, what do you want me to say?
Yeah.
What do you want me to put forward? How do you want your community ran? And I think if you think about it at a community level, if everybody thinks about it at a community level, then it has a knock-on effect of a national thing where we all end up, you know, representing each other, our families, our communities, and our beliefs much more accurately.
Yeah. I know that Shaun needs to watch his time a little bit. So just to bring this conversation, I suppose, completely full circle. What do you think are the main things that people of Scotland should be proud of? What are the things that we should be celebrating?
Well, I think definitely, having studied history more recently, that we should be proud of the fact that people from Scotland invented just about everything. Everything that's really important to the modern world. There was a period in Edinburgh when people got together and discussed the world, and we came up with so much during that time. And I think that's something we should be massively proud of. We were at the forefront of everything, like you said. And how can we get back to that?
It certainly seems as though the entrepreneurial wave has blown up in Scotland as well. Gav, you still in Codebase?
No longer work at home now.
You working from home now?
Yeah, but not like for me, for Scotland, it's just it's a great place. You've got great people, a great country in terms of scenery, and like you said, the entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial world is amazing. For me, as a young guy that has gone and set up a business, I've had no issues doing so. Like nothing in my way from a country perspective has stopped me being able to set up a business and work with people all over the world. So, I mean, what more can you ask for? Like in terms of having the ability to go and do what you want, create what you want, be whoever you want. Like the opportunity in Scotland is there, and you can't really ask for much more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, like, I can't remember what the question was. So
how awesome is Scotland, and why should we celebrate it?
Well, yeah, so to kind of pick up on what these guys have said, I think, and maybe to go full circle with what I said about this image that we have of ourselves as being underdogs, maybe rather than see it as kind of like a victim mentality and see it as, oh, you know, better luck next time, guys, we'll just see it as a kind of as a motivator for things like, you know, the amazing accomplishments we've had despite the fact that we're a small nation, or despite the fact that we've maybe not, people have maybe not got behind us to the same degree as other places. I think for me, the mentality of what a modern Scottish person is, and actually I spoke to Greg, the Polish guy from On Man. Sorry, Greg. That's so bad. But Greg is Polish, and all the stories I hear, Greg started a clothing brand with in his head that he wanted to create a contemporary Scottish athletic clothing brand. It took a Polish guy to do that, and whenever I talk to him, he says that he feels Scottish, and he almost felt like, sorry, should I say that I'm Scottish? And I said to him, no. I said, I think the fact that I would call you Scottish because it's got nothing to do with where you were born, or if you know the words to Flower of Scotland, or if you did see Scotland lose at France 98. It's to do with the fact that there's a community of people with a shared culture and a shared group of ideas, and you want to be part of that community, and you feel like that community represents you, and you feel like I'm part of that community too. So I would just say we need to kind of maybe change the stories that we tell ourselves about what it is to be Scottish, reframe them as positive, and maybe shake this kind of victim mentality, this underdog mentality, this kind of we're never really gonna achieve much. I don't want to say that. That sounds bad, but this lack of ambition, maybe, and I guess with the entrepreneurial spirit on a rise again, perhaps that's changing.
it's a very human thing, I think, to look at your losses and your failures and dwell on them. But I think, you know, like if you look at the things that we do actually do well and our successes and how good we are at some things, how about focus on them first?
Absolutely.
100%.
Even,
You know,
even
not,
something
not
like,
not use football as the barometer
Absolutely.
for our country's success.
even something like when I go down south, you know, a big thing is, and this I guess is a little bit out of date now, but people talk about Nicola Sturgeon. They're like, you've got a strong female first minister, and that, you know, that obviously you had Thatcher in the 80s, but it's this idea that like it's not a big deal that a woman is the first minister, or it's not a big deal that there was a point where there was like so many women who were leaders of the parties, gay women were leaders of the parties. You know, I know that the guy that's I don't want to say he's the leader of the Green Party, Patrick
Harvey.
Yeah, I know that is he openly gay? I don't want to say he is.
I don't know.
Sorry, Patrick.
Redacted.
I thought he was, but it's just this fact that I've always thought that we just don't really care. Like, if you do what you say you're going to do, then you're good enough for us.
The fact that you didn't know that actually just goes to show that who cares?
Exactly.
Like, who
Yeah,
really
exactly.
cares?
I hope he is. God, that would be a terrible faux pas, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Disclaimer: he might not be.
And I think that actually shows Scotland off in its best colours, because we are an inclusive country in many different senses.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something I learned through the referendum, but that's something I think we should definitely be proud of, that we are open, inclusive, and we don't necessarily have massive prejudices.
100%. Mic drop.
Yeah, loving it. Well, we'll finish on that note. I think that's a really positive thing. Guys, it's been awesome having you here.
Thanks for having us.
This has been
Yeah,
a
it's
lot
been
of
great.
fun.
Thank you.
I've just destroyed my own reputation. But ultimately, you know, why ruin one career when you can ruin four, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
I think it's been emotional.
Yeah.
It has.
Where did we start? We started with something, then we went to
know.
football and politics. This has been.
Did we even talk about social media? I don't think we
no,
did.
I was trying to bring it round, but I thought it's going to be too much like a crowbarring it in.
Well, you know what? Elliot's going to have to bring us back, guys.
Exactly.
So,
By popular
Do that
demand.
next time.
yeah.
By popular demand. God, it's like 9 o'clock. Yeah, I don't know what
Yeah,
I'm going to do with the
I
rest of
know,
my day.
I
I'm
know.
burnt out.
Yeah.
Burnt out.
Fantastic.
For anyone that's watched, listened to any of this, thank you so
If
much.
there's any of you left.
Yeah.
Don't
Cheers.
forget to like and subscribe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
To me.
No, joking.
Nah, get this guy.
No, I need all the help I can get. No, get me.
Or,
No.
no. We're
Right.
making it. We're making this an editing nightmare for Elliot. 'Cause he's
Yeah.
going to have to cut off.
Camera one.
Sean, you say something.
Adventure everything.
Right, guys. That's it.